Welcome to my economics channel. This video may feel long, but if you stay until the end, you may begin to understand the true nature of freedom and control in the modern economic world. Chapter 1. The Seduction of the Grand Design. To comprehend the fragility of human liberty, we must first examine the deep psychological yearning for absolute certainty. Throughout history, human beings have harbored a profound fear of chaos, constantly seeking refuge in structured order. When societies face devastating crises, such as the aftermath of global conflicts or severe economic depressions, the natural human instinct is to surrender individual autonomy in exchange for the promise of collective security and predictable outcomes. During the darkest moments of the 20th century, as the ruins of the Second World War smoldered across Europe, a powerful ideological illusion captivated the intellectual elite. The horrors of unregulated turmoil convinced many brilliant minds that society could no longer afford the unpredictable nature of free markets. They believed that a consciously designed, rationally planned economic system was the only path to ensure prosperity, equality, and the eradication of human suffering forever. This vision of a grand design is intoxicating because it appeals directly to human arrogance and our deepest moral sentiments. It whispers a seductive promise. If we simply gather enough data and place the right experts in power, we can engineer a flawless society. We eagerly convince ourselves that the intentions behind collective planning are noble, willfully ignoring the terrifying reality that benevolent motivations do not protect us from the inevitable rise of tyranny. Friedrich Hayek observed this sweeping ideological transformation with growing alarm, recognizing that the demise of freedom always begins with a compassionate desire to eliminate hardship. He understood that when a nation collectively decides to prioritize equal outcomes over equal opportunities, it must inevitably grant infinite power to a central authority. The tragedy lies in the fact that this relinquishment of personal sovereignty feels entirely rational and deeply moral to the very citizens being enslaved. We frequently observe this psychological process in modern life, where citizens voluntarily exchange their privacy and autonomy for the comfort of government intervention. Whether it is handing over data to technology conglomerates for convenience or demanding state subsidies to guarantee employment, the underlying mechanism remains identical. The illusion of a safely managed existence blinds us to the invisible chains we are willingly forging around our own necks, step by calculated step. The descent into oppression is rarely a sudden ambush. It is almost always a comforting, well-intentioned pathway paved with the desperate human demand for perfect security. Chapter 2. The Anatomy of Individualism versus the Collective Illusion. The foundation of any free society rests upon a concept that has been severely misunderstood and unfairly maligned over the decades: true individualism. Contrary to popular misconceptions, individualism is not a celebration of selfishness, narcissism, or the callous disregard for vulnerable members of the community. Rather, it is the profound philosophical recognition that every single human being possesses a unique perspective, unreplicable knowledge, and the inherent right to pursue their own self-directed destiny. True individualism demands a deep humility regarding the limits of human cognition, acknowledging that no single mind or central committee can possibly grasp the infinite complexity of society. When we respect individualism, we are essentially admitting that the billions of microscopic decisions made by ordinary people in their daily lives produce a far superior order than any artificial blueprint. It is a system built on mutual respect for the incalculable diversity of human dreams and desires. In stark contrast stands the philosophy of collectivism, which dangerously elevates an abstract entity, be it the state, the nation, or the working class, above the flesh and blood individuals who compose it. Collectivism constructs a mythical common good, a manufactured ideal that supposedly overrides all personal aspirations. When society accepts this paradigm, the individual ceases to be an independent moral agent and is brutally reduced to a mere cog in a massive machinery. The psychological danger of the collective illusion is how easily it weaponizes empathy against liberty. Advocates of collectivism employ morally charged language, persuading the public that anyone who opposes central planning must be an enemy of the poor and a champion of inequality. This manipulative rhetoric creates a social environment where dissent becomes psychologically impossible, as citizens are terrified of being labeled uncaring or selfish simply for defending their right to choose. Historically, whenever the abstract collective is granted supreme moral authority, the concrete lives of real human beings invariably suffer under unimaginable cruelty. If the ultimate goal of the nation is absolute industrial dominance or perfect wealth equality, then the suffering of the individual peasant or worker becomes a mathematically acceptable sacrifice. The collective becomes a ravenous deity that demands endless offerings of human liberty in the name of a utopian tomorrow that never arrives. When humanity sacrifices the dignity of the individual upon the altar of the collective good, it inevitably constructs a society where neither dignity nor goodness can survive. Chapter 3. The Invisible Web of the Free Market. To comprehend the miracle of a free society, we must examine the silent, spontaneous engine that sustains it, the market economy. The market is not merely a place where goods are exchanged. It is the most sophisticated information processing mechanism ever discovered by human civilization. Through the elegant simplicity of the price system, the market seamlessly coordinates the desires, skills, and necessities of millions of individuals who will never meet face to face. Consider the extraordinary journey of a single cup of coffee, which requires the unconscious collaboration of farmers in South America, sailors crossing vast oceans, roasters in industrial facilities, and baristas in your local neighborhood. None of these individuals are directed by a central dictator demanding that they cooperate to brew your morning beverage. Instead, they are guided entirely by fluctuating prices, which inform them exactly where their labor and resources will be most valued. Prices are not arbitrary numbers concocted by greedy corporations. They are flashing biological signals, communicating the absolute truth about global scarcity and abundance. When a sudden frost destroys a harvest, the price of the crop naturally rises, instantly informing consumers to economize and signaling producers to cultivate alternatives. This decentralized communication network ensures that resources are directed with astonishing precision, adapting to millions of unforeseeable variables every single second of the day. When a central authority arrogantly attempts to interfere with this spontaneous order, by imposing artificial price controls, it effectively blinds the entire economic nervous system. Setting prices too low through altruistic mandates inevitably leads to devastating shortages, as producers lose the incentive to create while consumers are encouraged to hoard. The planners then must intervene again to ration the scant resources, initiating a deadly cascade of expanding state control that chokes the very life from the economy. The free market accommodates the inherent flaws of human nature by harnessing individual self-interest and directing it toward mutual benefit. It does not require humanity to become perfectly virtuous. It simply requires a framework of fair competition and transparent rules. By allowing individuals to freely navigate their own pursuits, the spontaneous order cultivates a level of innovation, resilience, and prosperity that no army of expert bureaucrats could ever hope to replicate through deliberate design. The genius of the free market lies not in its perfection, but in its unrivaled ability to extract harmony from chaos without ever resorting to the whip of coercion. Chapter 4. The Mirage of the Planned Economy. The fundamental allure of the planned economy is rooted in a deep cognitive bias, the belief that human intellect can systematically organize society better than unpredictable organic processes. We look at the astonishing success of engineering in constructing skyscrapers and spacecraft, and we mistakenly assume that similar principles can be applied to managing human desires. This intellectual arrogance ignores the staggering difference between shaping inanimate steel and controlling the volatile spirits of millions. A planned economy necessitates the establishment of a centralized bureaucracy tasked with deciding exactly what should be produced, how it should be manufactured, and who ultimately deserves to consume it. To function effectively, this Supreme Committee must possess perfect knowledge of every single material shortage, technological breakthrough, and fluctuating consumer preference across the entire nation. Because such omniscience is biologically and mathematically impossible, the planners must rely on brutal simplifications and inadequate statistics. When the planners inevitably fail to anticipate the complex needs of the population, the resulting disasters are never attributed to the fundamental flaws of the system. Instead, the bureaucrats blame uncooperative citizens, malicious saboteurs, or a lack of sufficient enforcement power. Consequently, every economic failure becomes a justification for expanding the scope of the state, as the planners demand stricter regulations and harsher punishments to correct the errors generated by their own myopic arrogance. The tragic irony of the planned system is that it destroys the very efficiency and equality it originally promised to deliver. By eradicating the feedback loop of profit and loss, state-run enterprises have absolutely no incentive to innovate, improve quality, or conserve precious resources. Factories produce millions of defective products simply to meet arbitrary quotas, while desperate citizens wait in endless lines for basic necessities, trapped in an engineered environment of perpetual and humiliating deprivation. Furthermore, to force a diverse population into a singular economic blueprint, the planners must violently erase all individual ambition that does not align with the master plan. If the state decrees that agricultural expansion is the ultimate goal, brilliant artists and innovative engineers will be forcibly reassigned to toil in the fields. The mirage of the rational economy shines brightly from afar, but upon closer inspection, it dissolves into a barren desert of compulsory subjugation. The arrogant attempt to engineer a utopian economy does not elevate human civilization. It merely replaces the dynamic wisdom of the crowd with the blind tyranny of a few. Chapter 5. The Slow Surrender of Economic Independence. One of the most dangerous delusions harbored by modern society is the belief that economic liberty can be severed from political and personal freedom. We often hear intellectuals argue that the state can safely control the means of production and regulate employment, while still preserving our fundamental rights to free speech and democratic participation. Friedrich Hayek methodically dismantled this comforting fallacy, revealing that complete economic control is essentially complete human control. When a centralized authority assumes total ownership of the economic sphere, it automatically becomes the sole provider of every job, every medical service, and every loaf of bread. In such a system, you do not earn your livelihood through voluntary exchange. You depend entirely upon the mercy of government administrators for your very survival. If you dare to criticize the ruling party or express unpopular ideas, the state does not need a secret police to silence you. It can simply terminate your employment. This dependency generates a pervasive atmosphere of psychological submission, gradually eroding the courage and independence of the citizenry. A man who relies on the bureaucracy for his family's shelter will slowly learn to censor his own thoughts, alter his behavior, and parrot the official ideology to avoid destitution. The gradual surrender of economic independence creates a subservient population that is easily manipulated, conditioned to value absolute obedience over the dangerous burden of critical thinking. Moreover, the planned economy inherently destroys the right to choose one's own life path and vocational destiny. If the state must perfectly balance labor needs to meet its 5-year industrial quotas, it cannot allow millions of youths to freely pursue degrees in philosophy or art. Human beings are thus reduced to raw materials allocated by central planners to fill specific occupational slots, extinguishing the profound joy of individual self-discovery and creative fulfillment. We must recognize that economic freedom is not a secondary privilege reserved for the wealthy. It is the essential bulwark that shields the ordinary citizen from authoritarian abuse. The ability to resign from an oppressive job, open an independent business, or purchase goods from competing vendors is the ultimate defense against coercion. Without the decentralized power granted by private property and free enterprise, all other constitutional rights become empty words, written on meaningless parchment. To hand over the keys of economic independence to the state is to willingly lock oneself inside a cage where survival itself becomes the ultimate mechanism of extortion. Chapter 6. The Rise of the Ruthless. A comforting myth shared by advocates of central planning is that vast collective power can be entrusted to wise, compassionate, and incorruptible leaders. They imagine a system guided by benevolent philosophers who will distribute resources with perfect justice and deep empathy. However, Hayek discovered a terrifying sociological law. In any system that concentrates absolute power for the sake of achieving a singular grand goal, the worst members of society will inevitably rise to the top. To transform a diverse population into a unified instrument of economic production, the ruling authority must exercise unrelenting force against those who refuse to comply. A leader bound by deep moral convictions, who respects individual rights and hesitates to inflict suffering, will find it impossible to execute the ruthless measures required to maintain total control. The system therefore naturally filters out the compassionate, creating a vacuum into which the utterly unprincipled swiftly ascend. Those who ascend to the highest echelons of a planned society are not elevated by their intellectual brilliance, but by their chilling willingness to discard conventional morality. They are the individuals who can effortlessly sign warrants of confiscation, silence dissidents, and destroy livelihoods without a sliver of remorse. The totalitarian machine inherently rewards sociopathic behavior because the smooth execution of the grand plan demands a purity of will that is uncontaminated by empathy or hesitation. To solidify their reign, these ruthless leaders cannot rely exclusively on physical violence. They must cultivate a fanatical devotion among a crucial segment of the population. They typically target the disenfranchised, the intellectually insecure, and the resentful, uniting them through hateful rhetoric directed at a carefully chosen scapegoat. By directing societal anger toward the wealthy, the foreigner, or the unorthodox thinker, the dictators manufacture a frightening loyalty built entirely upon cultivated hatred. We must reject the naive assumption that totalitarian horrors were merely tragic accidents caused by a few historically evil individuals gaining power through bad luck. The inescapable reality is that the very architecture of centralized control acts as a powerful magnet for psychopaths. Whenever we build an institution granting limitless authority over the lives of millions, we are simply constructing a throne expressly designed to seat the most merciless tyrants human nature can produce. The consolidation of absolute power never attracts the virtuous savior. it inevitably summons the most ruthless predators to command the destiny of the defenseless. Chapter 7. The Decay of Truth and Moral Responsibility. When a centralized power seeks to dictate every aspect of economic and social life, it cannot permit the existence of competing ideas or independent truths. To justify the immense sacrifices and frequent failures of the master plan, the state must exert complete dominance over education, literature, media, and daily conversation. The destruction of liberty demands more than just confiscating property. It demands the methodical sabotage of objective truth and the systematic mutilation of language itself. In the pursuit of intellectual conformity, words with deep historical meaning are deliberately hollowed out and twisted to serve the state's agenda. Freedom is redefined as perfect obedience to the collective will, while justice is twisted to mean the eradication of all personal deviance. This linguistic distortion leaves citizens cognitively paralyzed, stripping them of the very vocabulary necessary to articulate their own oppression, and trapping their minds within a fabricated labyrinth of state propaganda. As independent thought becomes functionally treasonous, a profound decay slowly rots the moral foundation of the entire society. In a truly free market, individuals are forced to make difficult choices and bear the consequences of their actions, cultivating deep personal responsibility and authentic compassion. However, under the heavy blanket of collective planning, individual moral agency is subcontracted entirely to the state. The citizen is told that obedience is the only virtue required by society. This relinquishment of responsibility generates a chilling phenomenon where ordinary people become capable of extraordinary callousness. When citizens believe that the central authority is solely responsible for justice and welfare, they readily ignore the suffering occurring directly outside their own doors. The planned society fosters a tragic irony by claiming to institute universal compassion through state machinery. It actually extinguishes the delicate embers of genuine empathy residing within the individual human heart. Ultimately, the greatest tragedy of the serfdom path is the spiritual mutilation of the citizenry. When you no longer possess the agency to direct your own life, you cease to grow as a moral being. The atmosphere of constant surveillance and mandated conformity breeds an intensely suspicious culture where neighbors betray neighbors out of cowardice. The planned utopia does not create a glorious brotherhood. It creates a desolate wasteland of atomized souls terrified of their own shadows. The final victim of the totalitarian scheme is not merely the wallet or the body, but the extermination of truth and the absolute erasure of human conscience. Chapter 8. The Architecture of Liberty, Rule of Law and Private Property. To avert the catastrophic descent into tyranny, we must understand the specific architectural pillars that shield a civilization from arbitrary power. Friedrich Hayek did not advocate for an anarchic void with zero governmental presence. He envisioned a state strictly confined by the inflexible boundaries of the rule of law. The true rule of law dictates that the government does not manage specific outcomes for specific individuals, but simply enforces abstract, universal rules that apply equally to everyone. Imagine a referee on a football pitch who ensures the rules are followed, but never attempts to dictate which team must win or how the players must execute their strategies. This is the proper role of a liberal state. Laws must be predictable, objective, and formulated without favoritism, allowing individuals to confidently plan their own lives. When the law becomes a tool used by politicians to micromanage wealth distribution, the rule of law disintegrates into the rule of whim. Equally vital to the preservation of freedom is the unwavering protection of private property. Many modern thinkers have erroneously dismissed property rights as a mere mechanism for greed, ignoring its profound function as the ultimate bulwark against political coercion. Private property diffuses power across millions of hands, ensuring that no single monolithic entity can hold society hostage. It guarantees that even the poorest citizen retains a sanctuary where the long arm of the state cannot reach. Furthermore, property rights protect the exquisite diversity of human creativity. When individuals securely own the fruits of their labor, they possess the means and the courage to experiment, to dissent, and to challenge conventional paradigms. A writer with a private printing press or a scientist in a privately owned laboratory does not need the approval of a central planning committee to disseminate revolutionary ideas. Innovation explodes precisely because the state cannot veto the imagination of free men. While the system of free markets and property rights does inherently produce inequalities, it is the only system ever devised where success is generally tied to providing value to others. The wealth gap under capitalism is driven by millions of voluntary transactions, whereas the wealth gap under a planned economy is driven by political patronage and brutal exploitation. We must accept that the flawed liberty of the marketplace is infinitely superior to the equalized misery of the state prison. A society that discards universal laws and property rights in the name of perfect justice will inevitably destroy both justice and itself in the process. Chapter 9. The Eternal Burden of Freedom. As we look around the modern world today, the warnings issued over 70 years ago echo with chilling precision. The unrelenting expansion of the administrative state, the creeping normalization of algorithmic social control, and the constant demands for wealth reallocation reveal that the siren song of collective planning has never truly faded. We are continually tempted by politicians who promise to eradicate all uncertainty and protect us from the cruel inevitabilities of human existence. We must grapple with the uncomfortable psychological reality that true freedom is an immensely heavy burden. It requires the courage to accept complete responsibility for one's own failures, the resilience to navigate severe economic fluctuations, and the wisdom to tolerate outcomes we may individually deem unfair. The path to serfdom is so dangerously seductive because it preys upon our innate exhaustion, offering a childlike relief from the terrifying responsibilities that accompany adulthood in a complex world. Yet, we must remember what is at stake when we willingly hand our autonomy to the bureaucratic machinery. When we demand that the government shield us from every conceivable risk, we are secretly authorizing it to interfere in every conceivable aspect of our private lives. The pursuit of absolute security is a bottomless chasm that ultimately swallows all human dignity, transforming vibrant, innovative civilizations into stagnant reservoirs of dependent and easily controlled subjects. The defense of liberty is not a battle that was won in the past. It is a relentless, generational struggle against the deepest vulnerabilities of human nature. We must remain eternally vigilant against the seemingly benevolent arguments that justify the concentration of centralized power. We must aggressively champion the decentralized chaos of the free market, not because it is utopian, but because it is the only architecture capable of protecting the sacred flame of individual autonomy. If this immersion into the mechanics of freedom and control has provoked your thinking, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Your engagement helps disseminate these crucial economic realities to a broader audience. As we conclude this deep exploration into the fragile nature of our modern prosperity, I want to leave you with one final, unsettling question to ponder in the silence of your own mind. Are you willingly forging your own invisible chains under the delusion that a master holding a shield can never become a master holding a sword?